If you have heard news like we have reached very close to getting a HIV vaccine, or there is an injection on the horizon which can prevent HIV for 6 months, or further still, some people have achieved HIV cure. And after listening to all this, if you are confused, well, you are not alone. Because currently in the world of research in HIV science, there are three stories which are doing rounds. One is about long-term HIV prevention, something like Lenacapavir. Second is about availability in near future of a promising HIV vaccine. And third, about whether we have finally come close to cure of HIV. But among all these news and social media articles, it is many a times very difficult to separate facts from the hype. And that's exactly what we are going to do in this video. So hello friends, I am Dr. Piyush Chaudhari, a practicing infectious disease and HIV specialist in Pune. And at the end of today's video, I'm sure you'll all be able to know what exactly HIV does with immune system in our body, which makes it difficult to get a vaccine. What are the best possible preventive measures in 2026 as far as HIV prevention is concerned? And are we really very close to finding a HIV vaccine or HIV cure? And obviously, what is this new kid on the block, Lenacapavir? So let's begin from how HIV has changed over the last 4 decades. So HIV infection, that is the human immunodeficiency virus infection causing extreme immunodeficiency in form of AIDS, which was first detected in the 1980s, and in up to late 90s or even at times early 2000s, this disease meant a death sentence for the patient, and many patients used to succumb to this disease in that time because of lower immunity and various opportunistic infections. But over last few decades, this infection has evolved in terms of treatment modalities, because a lot of research has taken place and now we have a very effective, highly active antiretroviral therapy with which this infection has no more remained the dreaded disease that it used to be in the 80s, but it has become a chronic manageable condition, something with which a person can have a normal, healthy, productive life and survive as long as his or her other same age group people. Now, while all this thing has happened, there is also a lot of research in terms of HIV prevention, vaccine, and finding the likely cure for this elusive infection. Now, in spite of all this, HIV still continues to remain an important global health problem, because as recent as 2024-25, there are more than 10 million new HIV cases every year, and in many regions there are lakhs of deaths still attributable to HIV and HIV related complications. So therefore, further research about prevention and treatment of this disease is extremely important even in 2026. When we talk of HIV prevention, I always prefer explaining it in terms of a simple ABCD. From today's video, even if you take home this one message about HIV prevention in 2026, I think this discussion has served its purpose. So what is HIV prevention in 2026? It is A, that is awareness and testing. So as we all know, this infection, even when it is in a person's body, can remain without any symptoms or manifestation for several months or several years. And only when the immune system breaks down beyond a certain level, then the person can catch other infections called opportunistic infection and start showing up certain symptoms and signs. So therefore, the first step in HIV prevention is being aware that if there are any certain incidences like high risk sexual behavior, injectable drug uses, or any other incidences which can predispose a patient to HIV, such a person should get tested in time. Because on one side, if the person is tested in time, that person can take appropriate treatment for himself or herself. At the same time, that person can halt transmission of that infection to others in contact by taking necessary precautions, which may not happen if the person never gets tested and being unaware about his or her condition. Second part is B, that is barrier protection. So over last four and a half decades, in spite of all research in the field of HIV science, one thing which has remained most cost effective, affordable and simplest way of preventing HIV is barrier protection, that is use of condoms. Now what is also important is condoms can also prevent spread of other sexually transmitted infections, not just HIV. The only problem here is behavioral issues, adherence to following barrier protection in every situation, and issues when it comes to accidental exposures. So there comes the third part, which is the C, that is chemoprophylaxis. Here we have PrEP or PEP. So PrEP, that is pre-exposure prophylaxis. So in people with high risk behavior or high risk profession where likely exposures are bound to happen, these are medications which are given to them even before exposure happens so that they are protected from catching HIV infection. Whereas post-exposure prophylaxis is for people where there is accidental exposure, unexpected exposure, as an emergency pill where antiretroviral drugs are given to such a person to prevent infection from taking place in case of such exposures. Now this is extremely important in people who work in laboratories or healthcare professionals where there can be various unexpected accidental exposure through needle stick injuries, mucous membrane exposures, etc. Now the last part in prevention is very interesting in 2026, and that is detect and treat. So what this means essentially is that every possible person who has infection should be diagnosed, and every person who is diagnosed should be on treatment. Now why is this important? Because there is a very important concept called U is equal to U, that is undetectable is equal to untransmissible. So essentially through studies with large number of population over 1 or 2 decades, it has been proven beyond doubt that if a person who has HIV infection in his body is on appropriate treatment with full adherence to taking those tablets, has undetectable viral load in his blood sample with whatever available assays that are there in the use, then such a person cannot transmit this infection to his or her negative partners. So in short, in a couple where one person may be positive and the other is negative, it is still possible to not have any transmission to the negative partner if the positive partner is on appropriate treatment and his viral load is totally suppressed. So this makes it even more important to detect every person with HIV, because in this case it is not just treatment for that person, but it is also reducing transmission in the community in general. So here we are using treatment as a mode of prevention. So now a natural question which will come to your mind is that if there is an effective PrEP, PEP, effective treatment, then why do we require a vaccine? So that's a very valid and excellent question. So here we need to understand certain things, that all these methods of prevention and treatment that we speak of require 100% adherence to those practices by the person involved. Second, it requires continuous funding. So individual spending as well as healthcare spending is constantly required. There should be access to all these preventive measures at appropriate time and continuously whenever the person requires, and long-term follow-ups and long-term repeated testings is required when it comes to all these preventive methods. If there is failure in any of these steps, then transmission can still occur and prevention is not 100% guaranteed. At the same time, if we see the other side of it, for a person who gets infected, even today, treatment is lifelong. So the disease can be managed and controlled, but treatment has to be continued. And therefore, it is very important that we have something which can prevent us from catching HIV altogether. So here on this front comes the most exciting breakthrough in recent times, and that is Lenacapavir. Now this is the drug because of which all this news about HIV vaccine, HIV injection, where HIV doesn't happen for 6 months and all, is there in the news channels or social media. Well, first and foremost, Lenacapavir is not a HIV vaccine, but it is a long-acting antiretroviral drug which is used in HIV prevention. So essentially, it is a subcutaneous injection which has to be taken every 6 months to protect that person from catching HIV. So it is essentially a kind of pre-exposure prophylaxis or PrEP. So compared to the conventional PrEPs, that is daily oral pills which have to be taken every single day, and missing 1 or 2 days pills when exposure occurs can be responsible for infection, Lenacapavir provides the convenience that it has to be taken only twice in a year rather than having to take all 365 days in cases of patients who have high risk behaviors or high risk professions where there is more exposure to HIV. Now, what is also important is that in all this research, a lot of funding has taken place, and plus the cost of drug is significant. So even with Lenacapavir, constantly taking the drug every 6 months, having access to this agent, having enough funding for that is still required, and therefore something like a barrier precaution still remains important. Second part being, Lenacapavir, although it can prevent HIV reliably in almost 99% of patients in whom it was studied, it does not protect the person from other sexually transmitted infections, where again barrier protection like condoms becomes important. And what is also important here is that with a vaccine, we are getting something called as a lifelong or long-term immunity. So the immune system itself protects us with the help of that vaccine from catching infection, whereas Lenacapavir will provide protection irrespective of immune system being involved, but only for a definite period of time and not for longer term than 6 months. So now coming to HIV vaccine. Now you would say we have achieved eradication of diseases like smallpox, polio and such things. And in the recent times, something like H1N1 and COVID, we had vaccines which were developed very fast in a matter of few months when it came to COVID. Then why can't we have one when it comes to HIV, when we know this disease for last almost 40 odd years? Well, this is a very interesting thing related to HIV. So for that, let us understand very basic stuff related to our immune system and what HIV virus does with it. So instead of going through all the details, just remember things like B cells and T cells in our immune army. Now these B cells are essentially like your say ammunition factory. So it is something which keeps on producing antibodies which detects specific virus or bacteria infected cells and neutralizes them. So B cells is a factory of such antibodies. Amongst T cells, there are some types of cells which act as soldiers in our immune army. They help in killing the virus infected cells. Whereas there are another type of cells called the CD4 lymphocytes, which are kind of commanders in our immune army. So they regulate the whole immune response and they direct the immune system towards the enemy which is faced by it. Now, most of the viruses, they attack the soldiers, they attack the immune army, but HIV directly attacks the immune commander. So that is, it directly attacks the CD4 cells which regulate our immune response. So therefore it causes significant immunodeficiency. Secondly, it starts residing within these cells itself. So it just kind of attacks the headquarters of your army and not just small soldiers and distant units. Over and above this virus has a capacity of mutating itself very rapidly. Now with diseases like COVID, you would have heard that every few months or up to a year or so, the virus mutates. Now such extent of mutation can happen in a matter of hours when it comes to HIV. So every single day the virus can modify itself in different forms due to which it becomes at times very difficult for immune system to exactly identify the virus infected cells which can be then attacked by the antibodies. And at the same time, the antibodies against one type of HIV may not attack the another type if there is significant mutation. So because of all these things, plus the fact that even in a person who is on treatment, some viral particles can hide somewhere in dormant forms within our immune system cells for a long time, has made vaccine as well as cure of HIV quite elusive. But then, are we not near a vaccine yet? Well, there are a lot of promising and encouraging results that the scientists have achieved in recent years. So talking of 2025-26, there are three or four important milestones which we have achieved in terms of HIV vaccine. One important thing amongst them is broadly neutralizing antibodies, or the bnAbs. So in around say 10 to 15% of HIV infected individuals, the scientists found that they form antibodies in their system which can attack multiple different variants of HIV mutants in different cells where they are existing. Now, taking a cue from this, they have reached to a point where they are planning to, they are almost about to develop broad neutralizing antibodies which will attack multiple different variants of HIV, which will give long-term protection. Second thing is germline targeted therapy for vaccination. So here they go a step ahead. So instead of directly producing antibodies, they train the immune system itself through different stages. Like for example, a university or a school would train a student from primary, secondary schooling, college, junior college, senior college, and post graduation, and so on. So they train the immune cells right from the initial stages, from the immature stages, towards for those cells which can eventually form broadly acting HIV specific antibodies against various mutants of HIV. And third, and one of the most promising things for scientists today, is the mRNA vaccine. Now, you would have heard this term a lot when it came to COVID. Let us understand in half a minute what is exactly mRNA technology. So, the previous two methods that we were talking of spoke of the antibodies being formed, or the immature cells which are kind of converted to antibody forming cells. All these things occur after exposure to either a dead pathogen, the virus or bacteria, or a particle in that virus which is enough to trigger that response in immune system. Whereas mRNA technology, what it does is it itself generates something in our immune system which mimics a virus, and which then triggers the necessary steps in the germline modification, antibody production, and so on, in terms of giving step-by-step instruction to immune system about producing the defense, that is antibodies. So because of promising results during COVID, scientists have a lot of hope about achieving a similar success when it comes to HIV. But all these three technologies, although they have kind of reached a lot of advances in last few years, and plus although there is a lot of development from highly HIV affected regions like the African countries, mainly South Africa, and also good contribution from places like ICMR or NARI in India, but they are yet to reach the final frontier. That is, as of 2026, there is no HIV vaccine that is approved because of various factors. Because the vaccine has to be something which acts against broader variants of HIV, which gives long-term protection. It should not negatively impact the person's body or immunity. So it is very difficult. And with all these things, still it should be affordable and accessible to general population. And because all these things have not yet been successful, we do not have a fixed solution as far as HIV vaccine is concerned. Now, if we speak of HIV cure, every once in a while, my HIV patients keep sending me articles. There is a news article that so and so person in this European country got cured of HIV. Another report from somewhere else. So there are of course a few cases where HIV cure was either functionally or realistically documented, but those were very rare instances. Now, what was important there is how these patients got cured. I mean, some of them had blood cancers, they underwent bone marrow transplant, and the whole cell line was changed. Or during those things, they got some certain mutations, something like a CCR5 delta 32 kind of a mutation, which prevents HIV from entering their immune cells. So, taking a cue from that, scientists are trying to develop what we call as targeted germline therapies or therapeutic vaccines or mechanisms in such a way that we should be safely able to modify our immune cells so that HIV virus cannot enter or attack them. But because of the complexities involved in this and safety issues involved in this, there is so far no permanent solution which has been devised. So, although there is a lot of promise and progress in terms of HIV vaccination and cure, as of 2026, still the ABCD of prevention that we discussed and detecting and treating every patient who has got infection with HIV is the current way to prevent HIV reliably. So, friends, do not be afraid of this infection. Those who are detected with it, if they take proper treatment, can absolutely lead a normal, healthy life and also prevent transmission to their partners and in general in the community. So, if you found this video useful, please share it with as many friends and families as possible. In near future, I would definitely make detailed videos about concepts like pre-exposure prophylaxis, post-exposure prophylaxis, the U is equal to U kind of a concept which is very useful for HIV positive people, especially the serodiscordant couples and so on. And like always, stay informed, stay healthy.